Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Full Spectrum interview where we are questioning specialized experts about current events and the things you need to know. Today's guest is Shane Connor. Shane is the operator of ki4u.com, a website that has been promoting nuclear civil defense training for the public for well over a decade. The company, in addition to offering certified radiation detection instruments, also has the largest private emergency inventory of potassium iodine, Ki, in the USA, and he's delivered over 6 million doses worldwide since the Fukushima tragedy. They are the largest non-government source for civil defense radiation detector instruments and are the only private radiation lab in the country that specializes in recalibrating civil defense survey meters, Geiger counters, dosimeters, and monitors. And he's here with us today to talk about the good news of nuclear war and the biological effects of radiation. Shane, how are you today?
I'm great. Thanks, Michael, for having me, and I appreciate you and your brother and everything you do with News in 2 Minutes.
Oh, thank you. I know that you're the largest private distributor for potassium iodine. I remember watching the public scramble for Ki following the Fukushima tragedy. Brad and I were monitoring the tsunami that night and knew the plant was in trouble. We also watched closely the following days and weeks as the University of Berkeley completed the rain sample test. Those were some busy days for your company. Tell us what it was like.
It was pandemonium. I was up that whole night. I took calls till about 3 o'clock in the morning, taking orders, trying to help people, calm some of their fears also. We really didn't know where this thing would lead. Over the following 72 hours, we got up to over 20 orders per minute hitting our website. We have a very robust website with 10 servers geographically dispersed, and we were able to handle that. What we couldn't handle, though, we had the inventory. What we couldn't handle, though, was everybody wanted these products yesterday. And finally, we had to take our submit button off the order form when we hit 20 orders per minute and just give them a list and links to all of our dealers that we had shipped all of our product out to that wasn't already pre-sold. And then we spent the next week and a half just strictly shipping product. And we let all of our dealers handle the rest of it. And some of them, 3 of them, they actually crashed their websites. They couldn't handle the volume. The Geiger counters, the survey meters, the nuke alerts, everything flew out the door. It was a crazy, crazy time.
Those were some crazy times. And now you talk about the good news of nuclear war on your website, ki4u.com. Now that's a mouthful. Tell me, how can nuclear war be good news?
Well, it's accurately, it's the good news about nuclear destruction. Virtually the same thing. This has been out for about 7 years, and we tweak it periodically. And it's a 2-page article that the good news in a nutshell is the overwhelming majority of people that will be affected by a nuclear blast or nuclear terrorism can survive it if they know what to do. And this is the key. The most important product that we have is free, and it's the free information and teaching people what they can do. There aren't going to be enough products to go around. There isn't going to be enough Ki to go around if you haven't gotten it beforehand. And we actually tell people how you can do and acquire things locally to actually get protection for your thyroid gland if you don't have potassium iodide tablets. And we also tell them how they could actually make a Geiger counter if they needed to, if they're not able to acquire one. Now, both of these alternatives are harder to do, take some art, but we want to show people solutions because we know when the majority of people come to our website, it's going to be too late. We will have already have been sold out. We just don't have enough for the world when things happen. Even though we moved over 6 million doses since Fukushima, and the majority of that, the overwhelming majority, moved in the first month. So we try to do what we can do, but the government needs to be doing it on a much bigger level. Specifically, some of the information that we share with you is that if we had a for real nuke go off here in the United States, whether it was terrorists or the Soviets or the Chinese. The people right at ground zero, tragically, they're lost. I mean, unless they just happen to be in a subway or somewhere underground, they're toast. They're gone. But the overwhelming majority of people that will be affected won't be there. And I'll give you, for instance, most of your tactical nukes are going to be in the neighborhood of 200 kiloton, typically what you'd see off a submarine, or 500 kiloton if delivered otherwise. So we're in the 2 to 500 range. But even at the 500 kiloton range, if that hit a major city, you're looking at total destruction for probably 2 to 2.2 miles out from ground zero. Now, this is a 500 KT nuke airburst at the optimum height to create the most damage. To give people some perspective, the Hiroshima burst was 15 kilotons. So we're talking about a very big one, worst case scenario. At 500 kiloton, everybody's toast within 2.2 miles. However, the blast damage extends out much, much further than that. In fact, at 2.2 miles, that blast won't arrive at that point for close to 8 seconds. So you've got this bright flash, and the blast arriving is delayed the same as you have lightning, and then the thunder shows up later. It's a delayed blast wave. So you've got over 8 seconds, some people 15 seconds, 20 seconds before the blast wave arrives. Now, if the population was evenly distributed, we're talking about 15 times more people outside of that area of total destruction, outside of that 2.2 miles, over 15 times more people that could survive if they knew what to do at the first instant of that flash. Unfortunately, they're no longer taught what to do, and what most people are going to do, whether they're in schools or at work or at home, is they're going to run to the nearest window to see what that bright flash was over on the other side of town. And they're going to get there just in time to be shredded by the delayed blast wave blowing all that debris in the glass right into their face. And this is the tragic loss that we're trying to avoid, that if these people had been taught up to duck and cover, which has been ridiculed by the disarmament people and everybody else for the last 60 years, the simple duck and cover will save many, many times more people than were lost in the initial blast at ground zero. In fact, if you're caught out in the open and you even just lay flat on the ground, you're 8 times less likely to be hit by this brief 3-second tornado blast wave as it comes through, or to be picked up by it and become shrapnel yourself. So there's a tremendous savings in people that are going to be tragically lost just for lack of information. And then to go further, we have to deal with the radioactive fallout later, and there's even more people that will be affected by that, and there's more good news. Because with radioactive fallout, most people think they have to hunker down for weeks on end. That's not the case. Radioactive fallout is dangerous because it's giving off so much energy, which also means it's losing its intensity very quickly. In the first 7 hours after the blast, that radioactive fallout has already lost 90% of its lethal intensity. And in another 7-fold increase in time, 7 times 7, 48 hours since the blast occurred, 99% of that radioactive intensity, that lethality, is gone. So if you can hunker down anywhere quickly, cramped, miserable circumstances, but just for 48 hours, miss the worst of it, you are a survivor. But what are people going to do? They're going to be jumping in cars, they're going to get caught out in the open, they're not going to have a clue what to do. But people in their own homes, you can put together very quickly, you can put together mass around you at your house, and if you don't have a basement, that will make a huge difference. You're going to be cramped and uncomfortable and peeing in a pot, but in 48 hours, you're a survivor. And this is what we show people how to do for free on our website.
That's great. I mean, you're talking about shielding, being a little bit uncomfortable for a short period of time in the event of nuclear terrorism or a nuclear war. But most importantly, it is a survivable event. And that is really what the public needs to understand at large is that if we experience either one of those two events, that you can survive them. You just need to get educated. And I think that's what you're talking about in your article, and what you've just described is having that baseline education for those two threats. So your family, your children, yet they don't teach it anymore from the federal level. It's still very important to each one of our family members. Isn't that correct?
No, absolutely. It's very easy to teach. It's very easy to learn. And we've had 60 years of the disarmament movement telling everybody that civil defense is futile. And the biggest challenge that we have in educating people is to disabuse them of these erroneous notions that it's futile to try. I mean, people say stupid stuff like, well, if it happens, I hope I'm at ground zero and go quickly, blah, 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 blah. And this defeatist attitude is surrendering unnecessarily. We've got the statistics. I mean, we know what the blast damage is. We know what the radiation does. I mean, the numbers are rock solid. Over 90% of the potential casualties are 100% avoidable if people only knew what to do. And I'm not talking about a $30,000 bunker. If you can do it, it's wonderful. I'm not talking about tons and tons of instrumentation and having to go back to college to grasp all this stuff. It's very simple. It's very straightforward, and that's what we share with people. And we've written our 3 guides that are on our main page at ki4u.com. We have written them for the millions of people that will not come to look for it until it's too late, until we're sold out. Okay? So we wrote it for them on what they can do and acquire locally and still make a big difference. Now, we put a sentence in there, of course, if you're fortunate enough to be reading this before this happens, there's much more you can and should do and learn, and here's where you can get it. But we don't want anybody thinking it's futile to prep. It'll make the difference in millions of people's lives.
Right. Now, statistically, Brad and I know that we are much more likely to experience another nuclear accident similar or worse than Fukushima, or a low-level nuclear terrorism event with a moderate to medium level of radionuclide exposure. Now, having that be more statistically probable, how would our listeners begin preparing for those two types of events?
Well, again, it's knowledge there, too. There's a couple of different things going on. The first thing I want to address is that regardless of how bad it is, the panic will be worse. So even if the fear was very prevalent here that food's going to be a concern, milk's going to be a concern, and even if that didn't come true, we could have extreme shortages here and chaos with people cleaning out the stores like a hurricane was coming. And so we could, in our highways, could turn into demolition derbies with people, wanting to get out of the major cities and anywhere but where they are. The panic from the people, I'm more concerned with because of the lack of knowledge of what's going on. And I'll give you, for instance, we saw this as far back as Chernobyl, but we also saw it with Fukushima. We had elevated levels of radiation across the northern part of California and Washington from Chernobyl, where it showed up in milk, where it was 4 to 8 times higher than normal, and everybody, their hair went on fire. But what people didn't understand was it was still 200 times less than you would not drink the milk for.
Okay.
And with Fukushima, we've seen the same thing. We've seen elevated levels of cesium and radioactive iodine almost coast to coast. Almost every state has picked up an increase that we can attribute back to that event, looking at the wind and the time frame to get here. But again, it was many, 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 many times below where you wouldn't want to eat the food. Now, Fukushima bears very close watching for everything that's going on over there. But I'm starting off our talk here with explaining that our greatest concern may very well be the panic of our fellow citizens that don't understand the difference between an increase and a dangerous increase that is life-threatening or would destroy the food supply. So we need to be stocked up, stored up food water, communication, security, all of those things for disruptions of services, which will serve us well if we have a problem with the dollar or an EMP shutting down the grid or a pandemic or any of these other things that we're concerned about too. 9 out of 10 of your preps that I'm talking about will serve you for those as well.
Right. Now, you mentioned something very important that I want to make sure Brad and I want the listeners to know. The elevated levels are taken off of normal background radiation levels. That should be the benchmark that we're measuring the elevated levels from, correct?
That's right. That's right.
Okay. Now, you offer a free service at your company for the public. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what you're gauging it off of and how the consumer could benefit if they have concerns about elevated radiation levels?
Absolutely. On ki4u.com, and again, that's the letter K, the letter I, the number 4, and the letter u.com. Front and center in that page, you'll see a link that says free radiation contamination testing for your home and local area. What we do is you ship us your used automobile air cleaner or your small, not too big, or cut out a piece of your home furnace filter. Send us your filter, or if you have a water filter, we will run it through our spectrometer here, and we will tell you exactly what radionuclides have been collecting in it and their intensity. And since you first put that unit in there, so we could be getting the last year's worth, or if you haven't taken your air filter out since before Fukushima, we can tell you what's been going on since Fukushima, right out of your automobile. And this is what the EPA does too. They have a filter and they've got a fan set up in a device that goes ahead and sucks the air and contaminants through it, and then they go ahead and check it. And we'll do the same thing. And we've been doing this for over a year now. And what we have found is in probably 1 out of 5 cases, and most of them are concerns from the West Coast. They've come from all over the U.S., but most of them from the West Coast. We are seeing elevated levels of cesium, strontium, and also radioactive iodine. But they, again, these are levels that are above normal, but not crazily so. So Fukushima, obviously, what's going on over there is depositing it here, but it's not at a level that's immediately life-threatening or where the food would be bad. But it bears warning, and there is a way for some peace of mind that looking in the rearview mirror, we can take a look at what you have been receiving so far. And again, this is a free program, and the link is there on our website. Let me jump in with something else, though, for you real quick. When we talk about elevations from background, something to keep in mind is the world average background radiation is 10 micro-R per hour. Now, if you take a transcontinental air flight for your Thanksgiving holiday, you're going to be experiencing in the upper 300 to low 400 micro-R per hour. And that's because the cosmic radiation isn't being absorbed by all of that environment, air altitude, when you get up to 30,000 feet. And there's even areas in the world where people live all the time and have for generations where the background radiation is actually twice that, up in the neighborhood of 1,000 micro-R per hour. So you have to know what your local area is and what your food normally is for you to ever begin to see any increase. And the reason the Geiger counter is worth having is that when the panic commences, and we know we're not getting the full story from the government or from the Fukushima operatives, you have to be able to independently confirm what's going on. And most people that have our products or other Geiger counters, they are going to be served by those instruments simply reassuring them that they're perfectly okay where they are, because most people probably will be. But for those that aren't, the only way they're going to know is with an instrument. And again, we want to cull ourselves out of the mass panic that could erupt if you don't have a way to independently confirm what's going on.
Right, I agree. Now, I'd like to back up a little bit. You had, in your testing, now we need to, for the listeners, differentiate between a scintillator, which you're using to identify the isotopes. That's a very sensitive piece of equipment. I know a scintillator that you can measure alpha emitters with can run as high as $10,000. That's what you're using to actually look at the air filter samples that people can send in, so you can identify the isotopes that are in the air in those environments, and then what the exposure rate is from those isotopes, correct?
That's correct. And our instrument actually is a $25,000 instrument, and it has a library in it that catches everything.
Okay.
So, I mean, any kind of a nuclear weapon or anything out of the medical field or anything out of a power plant or industrial use, the library will catch it. And this is actually what DHS would be using if they had to respond to a nuclear event. So we've got the state-of-the-art instrumentation here, and trying to put people's mind at ease. There is stuff to worry about, yes, but we don't want to waste 90% of our effort on the stuff we don't.
Right, absolutely. I agree with you. And that would be the major differentiation for our listeners, is that from a scintillator and a Geiger counter. A Geiger counter is going to make you aware that there is an emission of radionuclei, where a scintillator is going to identify the isotope and give you a deeper reading in counts per minute as to what the exposure would be from that particular isotope, correct?
Absolutely.
Now, not that we would give up our Geiger counters, because that is a work, in my view at least, that's the working man's tool to identify the hazard.
No, absolutely. And I mean, obviously, I'd go with about 3 different instruments, because I don't ever want to trust my life to just one if the kid dropped it, you know?
Right.
But no, the Geiger counter, the Geiger counter is what you need. Now, there's a limitation on the Geiger counters that everybody needs to understand up front. It's going to be great for checking food and water and low-level stuff that we've seen so far from Fukushima. But most Geiger counters are completely saturated out, and they either don't work or they read erroneously over about 100 milliroentgen per hour. Okay. And this is not a life-threatening level. So if we're dealing with anything, if you're up close to Fukushima, the biggest problem Fukushima had, and this is a story that hasn't been reported, is they didn't have instruments high enough to read what they were reading.
Yeah, we've heard that.
I mean, this was a big problem over there. And if we had a Fukushima closer to home, or and I feel, and we've talked about this privately, you and I have, it's inevitable that we're going to have nukes in the world, if not here in the U.S., someday go off. Whether it's terrorism or the Chinese help get something over here or whatever, we're going to see nukes here, and the Geiger counters are going to be great for decontamination afterwards, and for checking your hair, make sure you cleaned up well enough, and check your food and water. That's fine. But for the immediately life-threatening stuff, the Geiger counters are insufficient to the task. And the Civil Defense Program had 3 levels of instruments. They had Geiger counters for low-level decontamination duties, and then they had a high-range survey meter. And that measures everything from the Geiger counter up. So that measures all the way up to 500 Roentgen per hour is what the high-range stuff do. And 500, 600 Roentgen, just to give your listeners an idea, exposure to that with 1 hour, you're dead.
Right, full body.
You may be 2 weeks dying, but you're walking dead. 5 to 600 Roentgen, your history. So you need to have something for those higher levels above just checking to see if the food and water is starting to get a little bit hot. You need to have that higher instrument.
Right. Now, that in our threat protocol, that is what we would basically map out a hot zone with. And then you have the dosimeter as well.
Yeah, that's
Could you tell our listeners a little bit?
Yeah, that's the third one that I omitted there. A dosimeter is measuring your total accumulated dose since you turned it on or last zeroed it out. So it's like the odometer on your car. It tells you the total accumulated miles or radiation that you've accumulated, where the speedometer is telling you how fast you're getting hit with it. So the dosimeter is a very important instrument. It's also one of the cheapest ways to have some radiation protection on a tight budget, because they run about $150 new, but we sell the civil defense recently recalibrated units for $45. And that unit, if you put it with a watch and you put it outside for an hour and it comes back in reading 25 MR, well, that also converts to 25 MR per hour. So now it's actually done the duty of a rate meter or a survey meter when you time how long it took for it to get up to that reading. So
that's an excellent point for our listeners who are on a budget that need to really make a modification for their create a field modification to suit their purposes. Now, as you know, Full Spectrum Survival has been a customer of yours for about 8 years. What really started off, Shane, for us as simple threat mitigation has really turned into a large part of our overall preparedness planning. I know you're bringing online a new generation radiological measuring instrument. Can you tell our listeners about it?
We came out with the Nuke Alert over 10 years ago, which is the little keychain attachable radiation detector that's been very popular. And that measures the higher levels of radiation. It essentially starts where the Geiger counter stops and goes up, but you can carry it in your pocket. Now, what we always wanted to do was address the level below that, and what we've done, and fortunately because we've been a successful business, it has funded this R&D. But ever since we developed that 10 years ago, we've had a growing list of, if I could do anything, this is what I want the next machine to do. And that is the Nuke Alert ER. And the Nuke Alert ER goes from 1 microrad all the way up to 600 rads, or 600 Roentgens per hour. This is a 1 billion to 1 range. So what we've done is we have combined the old civil defense, Geiger counter low range, survey meter high range, and dosimeter into one instrument. And you can preset alarms on it so that when it gets up to a certain rate, it'll alarm you, or when it gets up to a certain accumulated dose, it'll alarm you. And it will also, for as long as the internet's hooked up, you can actually have it hooked up to the internet and go look at everybody else's instrument that's hooked up to the internet also and see what's going on. I mean, it's wonderful to know where you're standing with this instrument, that you're okay. But it's even better to know what the other guy's instruments are reading 3 miles, 30 miles, 300 and 3,000 miles upwind of you. And now with this instrument, you'll be able to see what everybody else's instrument is reading upwind of you also.
Well, that's great. Now, you've taken into account some fail-safes to make sure that the people who are viewing other instrument readings, if they're running tests, that it doesn't create any type of panic, correct? Could you explain that to the listeners, how that works?
Well, now we're still getting all of this set up. We've only got about a dozen of them online nationwide right now. But what you're able to do when you go in is you can set which units you want to keep an eye on. In other words, for 3 miles out or 30 miles or whatever. And you can also preset how many of them need to be over the threshold that you set before you get the text message that, hey, something's going on. You need to go check it out. And all of this is automated. So if one guy's playing with his Fiesta Wear or smoke detectors or something,
right,
you're not going to get an alarm and go crazy about it. But if you've got it set where 3 of them have to be going over the threshold concurrently, well, now you get confirmation that it's not somebody playing with theirs or out doing uranium mining with it or something, checking rocks.
Right.
But it's somebody. Now we've got 2 or 3 or 5 or however many you want. They're all over the threshold, and now you get that text message or that email that you've already preset up on your notification, and you go take a look at it. Now you see on a geographic screen, you get to see where all the hot spots are and which way this thing's moving.
Yeah, that's great. That is a great service for the public. Now, you had once told me in a conversation we had that having a radiation measurement device was likened onto being the only man in a dark room with a flashlight. You know, Brad and I would like our listeners to be as prepared as being that only man or woman with a flashlight in a dark room. So knowing how important it is throughout our conversation to be able to measure radiation levels for yourself independently, what are some of the basic instrument options available to the listeners?
Well, the absolute cheapest way to go would be in the back of the Nuclear War Survival Skills book, or buying the pre-made kit from us. You can actually make your own radiation detector, and that's called the Kearney Fallout Meter, which some of your listeners may have heard about. This is in the back of the Nuclear War Survival Skills book, and it was made to go in the newspapers of every newspaper in America on the eve of World War II, or World War III rather.
Okay.
For a nuclear exchange, this would allow, and this was developed by Oak Ridge National Labs, allow families to build from common materials at the house, tin can, aluminum foil, dental floss, plastic sheeting, to build their own radiation detectors so they would know when they needed to go to shelter and when it was safe to come back out.
Okay.
And so that's the low end. And then we've got the dosimeters, the civil defense ones, $45 each, we spoke of earlier here. Footnote, however many dosimeters you have, you always need to have one dosimeter charger, which allows you to zero it back out, so you can essentially turn the odometer back to zero again. You need one of those.
Okay.
They're $65, but you could have 100 dosimeters. We just need one charger.
Okay.
Up from there would be the well, actually cheaper though would be the RAD sticker and the RAD triage cards. And these are color changing cards as they get exposed to radiation. And there's a chart right on them built into them. The smallest one is the size of a postage stamp, and I have one right on the back of my driver's license. And when I'm traveling this Thanksgiving, if something weird happened, I can just pull out my driver's license, take a look at it, and if it's not changing color, whatever's going on isn't affecting me there yet. And
that's great.
And those are $5 a piece. So going up from there, we've got the Nuke Alert, the original keychain attachable, you're $160. And then the Nuke Alert ER is $750, and this is the instrument that replaces all other instruments. And that would be at the top end.
That would be that's a great broad spectrum of prices and products that can have a listener get started on the nuclear side of their preparedness, which unfortunately, we have talked a lot offline. It's just a fact of our reality going forward. Hopefully, Fukushima will be contained. They won't have criticality again during the fuel rod removal. And hopefully they've worked out their Middle Eastern issues, but more than likely, statistically, something else is going to happen. And it's our effort, I know, along with yours from a public service, to provide the education, and then on the backstop of that, make sure they have the necessary implements so they can remove the fear and make good decisions.
No, I absolutely agree. And two other quickies I forgot to mention was all of the civil defense meters, the Geiger Counters, survey meters, and dosimeters. We do recalibrate and recertify them if you pick them up on eBay or elsewhere. And we're the only private lab in the country that is certified for certifying and recalibrating all of these Geiger counters and survey meters.
That's good. Now, what was your website again? Could you give it to our listeners where they can go receive free information on nuclear preparedness? I know you just have probably a week's worth of good, solid reading there, and then the product descriptions that you have. Absolutely.
KI4U.com. The letter K, the letter I, the numeral 4, and the letter U.com. And front and center on that page, we tell people, if you don't have time for anything else here, read these three guides. And you'll see them front and center: the good news for nuclear destruction, what to do if a nuclear disaster is imminent, and When an Ill Wind Blows from Afar, and that's talking all about Fukushima. And all of that is there on the front page, front and center.
That's great. Now, Shane, for our listeners, Shane has gone ahead and put together a special promotional gift. So for anyone who calls in and orders $100 or more of his products that he's selling, you'll receive that. And Shane, we want to thank you so much for being with us here again. We'd like to have you back on in the future. We look forward to working with your team for the completion of our DVD survival series as well, and on the Prepper movie. So again, thank you for your time.
Hey, and thank you and for everything you do, and look forward to watching the next news update.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.